Welcome to episode 94 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And you already know that. You read the book. You know more than I do.
All right. And I'm Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast. And I wish I could write something as good as captured in this film.
Definitely. This film is utterly amazing. And I know we're going to probably say that way too many times, but In the Mouth of Madness is one of those films that has stuck with me since the very first time I saw it. I think about it a lot with my own writing. Like, it's kind of become a joke with me, like, oh, I hope that's not the thing that becomes real, you know? Or like, hey, I hope that is. But anyway, as long as we're talking about writing, let's just jump straight into our guest, because we're going to talk about that a lot. So Tim Waggoner's here today. Tim, welcome to the show, man.
No, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
I told you right before we went on air that I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass by saying this. Writing in the Dark is, I legitimately put this as my favorite writing book. And when I say that, I'm saying you just replaced On Writing by Stephen King. And that was a book that highly affected me and like really made me focus on what I wanted from writing. What your book did is it hit a different part for me. That book is very much like, here's how you focus, and here's King's advice, and here's like King's whole backstory and all this stuff. And yours reads as a textbook in a good way. That's usually something I don't say nicely. And in this case, I mean, this book feels like a complete one-on-one with a great teacher. I legitimately want to thank you because I finished my last book while reading this, and I feel like it got me over the final hump.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you found it useful.
I know you've taught like some writing classes at the Stokers and different stuff like that. I know you're a teacher by trade as well. What led to like writing this book? Like, did you have a bunch of it kind of already done and you were like, I should just compile this? Or was it, this is all the info I have and I want to get it to people, or what?
It was probably a combination. You know, when I first started off writing in my late teens, and I'm going to be 57 next month, so it's been a while. But I was still living at home when I was, early on in college. And one day my dad came home. I was sitting on the front porch, so it must have been warm out. And he had stopped at a bookstore and picked up a copy of Writer's Digest, which I had never heard of and didn't know it existed. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no internet back then, no Amazon or anything. No way to network with other writers and find out about this stuff. And he didn't say much. He just said, I saw this, thought you might be interested in it. You know, and he handed it to me and walked off. And I sat there and read that thing cover to cover. And I just, I subscribed to it and I started falling in love with writing about writing. I thought it was just very interesting. And I really was impressed with Lawrence Block's columns on fiction writing, which is why I dedicated Writing in the Dark to him because of that. Yeah. And then, as the years went on and as I started teaching, I, like so many teachers, I realized that I learned so much from trying to help other people become better writers that plugged right back into my own writing. And then later on after that, I was thinking about starting a blog, and I was speaking to Jason from Apex and Apex Publishing. And I said, I don't know what to do my blog about. He's like, you're a writer and you're a teacher. Write about writing. People will read that. I was like, okay. And so I started my blog. And just as time went by, I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind for years that it would be nice to do a how to write book just for working through the process of it. Years ago, I was talking to Tom Monteleone at some conference or other, probably World Horror, World Fantasy. And he had just finished writing his book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Writing Fiction. And he asked me if I have ever written anything like that. And I said, no. And he said, oh, well, if you ever do, it's amazing how much, that you'll just get out of it in terms of what you learn or realizing things about the process that you didn't realize you knew, making connections. So all of that made me want to do one, but I never really felt like, I had knew enough. So, it seemed like something that was kind of like not necessarily unreachable, just way in my future maybe. But as I started writing blogs, I started writing, bits and pieces. And as the years went by, I was like, I've got a lot of pieces on my blog that I could expand. Um, and I've got new things now to do. I got a lot of PowerPoints that I've done for workshops that I could turn into chapters and things like that. And I felt like I had written enough that I at least had I felt like I guess I could write this thing with at least some authority. So I just pitched it, and Jen and John at Raw Dog Screaming Press, they were excited about it. And then when I sat down to write it, it just poured out of me like water. And when I was done, I forgot most of what was in it. So if anybody who would like do an interview with me, they'd say, "Oh, you these cool questions you ask all these writers," and I'm like, I don't remember what 2 questions they were. What were those? It was like my brain just kind of burnt out for a little while, and so it was odd. I've never had like a brain dump like that when I was writing something, but I'm so glad that people seem to find it useful, because that was the most important thing for me, is that people do find it useful, that they get something out of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it's kind of set up like a textbook. You have like the questions you were just talking about, or the writing prompts, or different things like that. But it's such a conversational tone. And that's what I meant with it feels like a one-on-one class. Because like when I was getting my master's, I did a lot of one-on-ones because I was in the creative writing track, so you do a lot more sitting down and really like tearing stuff apart together. And it really reminded me of that feeling. You said you've written enough other stuff. I had no idea how much stuff you've written. I've read a bit. I've read a lot of your short fiction. And I pulled up like your Wikipedia page, and I was just like, oh my God, he's written way more than I thought. So since I kind of skipped this at the beginning, do you want to kind of give our listeners a rundown of what you do?
Sure. At this point, I've published around 50 novels. They're kind of like split between media tie-ins and fantasy and urban fantasy and horror. I've done maybe getting close to 200 short stories over the last 30 years or so, a bunch of articles, and been teaching creative writing and composition for about 30 years as well.
That's so cool. Yeah. Now, it shows, like, when you read this book. I mean, I know I'm just constantly talking about how great this book is, but there's a reason for it. It comes through. It shows your years of paying your dues and learning the process. And I love that you gave that back to the community. And that's another thing I want to say about the book, and then I'll stop pitching it for you constantly. But I really liked how communal your book feels as well. You have like these quotes from other people, and like just kind of like their processes or their thoughts on things. And I thought that was a really cool way to incorporate the community, because writing is a community. On one hand, it's the loneliest job in the whole world. And on the other hand, this community can be so strong when you use it correctly. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was cool how that comes through in your book as well.
Yeah, you hear all the time the precept of pay it forward. But in genre fiction, like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, maybe especially in horror, I mean, people mean it all my life. As I got to meet people, it's just constant paying it forward. And, it's one of those things where, not only do you see it modeled by other people, if they help you and you say, oh, I wish there's something I can do for you, they always say pay it forward. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bedrock principle of community. Plus, when it comes to like creative writing education, the worst thing you can do is just listen to one person, regardless of what that person has to say. I mean, you want to go ahead and sample as many different perspectives as you can to see, what that does for you, what little bits and pieces you can take that's useful for you. And so I really wanted to make sure that was reflected in the book.
I love that. All right, so let's jump into the film a little bit. So this is the part where I always ask, why did you pick this film?
Well, for one thing, I had to think of a film that maybe you hadn't covered yet. Since it's like, okay, they've covered a whole bunch, and It's almost like when you're asked to write a story for a theme anthology. You're like, okay, everybody's may do this about a zombie or that about a zombie. What haven't they done? Just kind of imagine. And also, I was just trying to think of movies that, had an impact on me as a writer, and ones that have stayed with me for a while too. That weren't the normal ones that people might say. They might say, oh, Halloween, or or Psycho, or whatever. But this one's been a touchstone for me over the years. So that's why I picked it.
Nice. All right. So, Don, I know you've seen this before.
Yes.
How'd you feel rewatching it?
Well, I was telling Tim before we started that it was weird because I remember watching the film, but I couldn't remember anything about it when I went back into watching it. Until certain things happened, I was like, oh yeah, I remember, X happened. Oh, I remember the bike. I remember this. But there's some movies that we forget about because they're so bad. But there's some movies that we forget about because we saw them and then we never had another opportunity to see them again, or we weren't reminded about them, or, just life gets in the way of us getting back to some of these films. But in all honesty, I mean, it was just as good. Well, let me rephrase it this way. It aged very well for a mid-90s horror film, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
The themes, the special effects, the visual effects, the practical effects that are being used, the way the story's told. This is one of those movies you don't need to remake. You could just re-release it, and everything would be easy to pick up upon. Other than somebody probably complaining like, well, why doesn't you just make a phone call? Why didn't you take a cell phone out and do whatever? Oh, they're lost. Why don't they just check Google Maps or Apple Maps? Other than that, I mean, I can't see anybody coming up with a valid complaint about this film that doesn't have anything to do with updating it. But again, if you don't need to update it, keep it in the 90s, and just re-release this film, for people to become acquainted with how well the story is told, how well the story it envelops around itself, and just how terrifying some of the aspects of the film are.
And that's what I was going to say. The horror holds up.
Yes.
This movie is terrifying compared to a lot of the stuff we watch now. The biker gets to me every time. I forget about the biker, and every time I watch it, I'm always like, oh crap, no. And it still makes me so uneasy. And you know me, I don't scare easily. I'm the guy who doesn't really care unless it's a jump scare. Jump scares get me no matter what because my cat jumping off the couch gets me. So jump scares are the easiest thing in the world with me, but that's not the same as terror, right? And the imagery, the themes of horror, and just the absolute creepiness, like the guy handcuffed to his wife, that's terrifying today, 100%, And I feel like this horror is so timeless. So yeah, this really does hold up.
Yeah, if you did want to update this, it'd be super simple. I mean, you would just have a couple scenes where somebody uses a cell phone, somebody tries to check for the town on the internet and can't find it, or can't find a website for Sutter Kane or whatever. Somebody would mention there's going to be a video game based on the books. Maybe maybe the movie's going to be released to streaming services as opposed to the same time in the theater. It would take you, all of 5 extra minutes in the movie to go ahead and seed those things in, and it would still be perfectly fine for a modern audience.
Well, and even then, you'd get there and your phone wouldn't work, so we'd write it out right away anyway.
Right. Or else
that's it.
The weird voices coming across or whatever, and there's all kinds of ways to incorporate. It's one of the things I try to do when I write is find ways to incorporate cell phones and the internet instead of just having people not be able to use them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge thing that we all need to be doing because cell phone not working has been the go-to for the life of cell phones so far.
Right.
And you walk that fine line though, because you also don't want the technology to be so outdated that it hurts your film on rewatches later.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I feel like you can really walk that fine line. Social media will be around forever, whether Facebook and Twitter are the face of it or not,
Mm-hmm.
And we're always going to be evolving with that no matter what it becomes. So, I mean, there's definitely ways around it. And I find that much more fascinating than just shutting off your phone. My comment was really, this is what Hollywood would do, because that's what they always do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting how that we've had such a, like in the last 5 or 10 years, so many movies set like in the 70s, just so you don't have to worry about the internet. You don't have to worry about cell phones. Same for the 80s. And it occurred to me not too long ago that it's almost like when I was a kid and Hammer horror movies would be set like, before the 20th century. And I was like, and I think, oh my God, that's like pre-technology days for a lot of younger people. It's like almost medieval times where, you tell stories about people fighting with swords and riding on horses. And I think it gives a sense of, you're in a world where you're even more isolated, or you have fewer things to draw on to help yourself. In a like a Hammer movie, there's no cop. Maybe there's a constable, but there's no cops. There's no like modern guns. And really, it's just kind of the individuals against whatever the thing is. And I think in a lot of movies, like the Conjuring movies and whatever, it's that way, because they are set in the 70s or like Stranger Things. Really, it's just you against the thing. You don't have anything extra to help you.
That is creepier. Like, take payphones as an example, right? If I'm watching an 80s film, I expect that you're going to be able to find a payphone somewhere. That payphone may not work, but it should be out there, in theory, depending on where you are. It should be out there, and you're going to find it. Whereas a cell phone, once you don't have it, like, you don't know where another one is for sure.
Right, and you can't always use somebody else's because it might be locked or whatever.
Yeah.
But the payphones, they were great back in the day because, especially at night, you'd be enveloped in a circle of light, completely dark all around you. You would have no idea if anything was out there coming to get you. You'd be so vulnerable while you're trying to seek help. You can get the same thing with a cell phone if people are like hiding in the closet and speaking softly or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's not that same sort of that sense of dread that you used to get from those scenes with the payphones.
Yeah, because you're out in the open and extra vulnerable because the person can see, or the creature or whatever it is can see you and you can't see them.
Right.
My brain's going like 900 miles an hour now. Anyway, we don't have to keep talking payphones. We can move along to whatever you like. So is there somewhere specific you'd like to start with the film, Tim?
Well, I rewatched it last week and watched it with my daughter who hadn't seen it before. She's 26 now. And she's like the only member of my family that wants to watch horror movies with me. So we'll go on horror watching binges sometimes when she comes on over. And so we watched this. And when you were talking about the husband handcuffed to the wife, that's just one of the times she's like, what? It's so great to listen to her. All the things I know are coming up and that the imagery is just going to, just get to her. And so that was those kind of things. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things that struck me this time that I'd always kind of felt, but I couldn't articulate, was how weird the opening is. Because the opening where, Trent is in the character played by Sam Neill, where he's in the asylum, it's almost like it's from another movie. It's kind of artificial in a way. It's humorous. And once he's in his cell and it's time for things to start getting, reality starts to twist or whatever, then it seems like a stereotypical horror movie. At least it's going to be more of a standard horror movie. But it's almost like a Joe Dante film or something. I may just be thinking about that because the director of the asylum is the same actor who was in Gremlins 2. He's always good, but. It was just so odd because the rest of the movie does not have that tone. They don't have jokes like they had in the beginning of that. And it's interesting. It's almost like, since we know kind of, once we've seen the movie, like where that scene takes place, it's almost like reality's already shifted in a way that, we don't see again till maybe toward the end of the movie. I don't know if that was deliberate or it was just kind of the way it went. But even the asylum itself looks so strange. I mean, it's got high ceilings and everything's white and it's so different than the rest of the movie. So I thought it makes a really good scene to kind of already kind of make you unbalanced, not quite sure what's going on, regardless of, the rumors that it's pretty bad out there right now or things are happening out there right now.
It really messed with me. I'd forgotten the beginning and the end. Like, in my head, it just starts with him sitting in the cafe and the guy trying to kill him. And I was rewatching it and I was like, I don't remember this at all. And it was so weird because, well, I remembered it, but I didn't remember it being there. I thought it was like later for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But like it got to the point where they were like, oh, he just asked for a crayon. But then he like drew all over himself. And I'm like, that's a marker. Like, and then I got stuck on that. But then with reality shifting and everything, I was like, is that some random weird thing that's in there? And then I overthought everything after that.
Right. Well, I always wonder how he managed to get so many drawings out of one crayon. I mean, he covers everything, and I'm like,
everything.
Some of that stuff's pretty dark, and you can see he's made so many marks, and so
right.
Special reality warping crayon.
As a dad of a 6-year-old, I looked at that and I was like, that crayon's not going to last that long. but what got me, you mentioned the humor in the beginning, but there were 2 things, probably 3 things that really got to me. But then there was kind of a serious thing that doesn't make sense. If you haven't seen the film before, it doesn't make sense until probably 2/3 of the way through. But you know, when he's fighting with the orderlies and he makes that comment like, oh, you know, he hit him in the nuts, and he's like, it was a lucky shot. I didn't mean to hit you on the balls. And then when they lock him in the padded cell, they start playing the Carpenters, and his reaction is like, oh God, not the like of all things, that's the thing that's really going to bother him.
Right.
And the song itself, like the song, it's only just begun by the Carpenters. You know, at that point, I'm sitting there thinking, like, I know some things, because some of the memories are coming back, and I just think about how good of a touch it was to have that song with those lyrics playing. One, the story's only just begun, but your understanding what's taking place has only just begun, and the end of the world has only just begun. Right. So all those things getting thrown in there, and you start to realize there's some deep shit coming.
Right.
Like, in more ways than one.
Yeah, and it's so cool because it's like that moment is the capstone of, you know, no, I wouldn't say slapstick humor or outrageous humor, but almost. It's kind of on the edge of that. And it's like the last moment of that, really. I mean, we get some things that are kind of darker type humor, and we get some things that are him making jokes that are, you know, they're okay jokes, but you're not going to laugh at them. They're fine.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that they cap that off.
Well, I was going to say the other thing that comes up, and again, I'm trying to read through my notes, but it was that line about this is not the ending. You haven't read it yet.
Mm-hmm. And,
you know, just again, going back to the end, because this film is almost cyclical as far as like telling the story and having things come out. And the whole idea that you find out later on that Sutter Canny's telling you like, well, all this stuff has already happened because I've written it. You know, everything that I've done is preordained. Like the guy coming at you with the axe, I already wrote that. So, you know, you were supposed to come here anyway. So you start looking at this film in different ways because you start to realize, hey, the guy at the beginning wasn't some crazy lunatic with an axe or anything that was going on. This was a guy who, you know, was his publicist who read the book, or his agent who read the book and went insane from it. But then you kind of question, is it insanity, or is it he's fulfilling a purpose by scaring this guy into thinking about this hysteria that's surrounding the book? So there's some really good things that make you ask questions early on, especially on a second viewing, but start making you ask questions about the early parts of the film as far as what fits, what doesn't fit, what are some cool touches, but then also touching on this whole idea with Trent that, you know, he's a fraud investigator. You know, he's an insurance investigator to looking out for fraud, and just how good he is, and how, I guess, in a sense, how arrogant he is about his job, and the fact that he can smell a scam a million miles away. He knows what's going on, to the point where the early hysteria he doesn't even take seriously. It's like, oh, it's just a marketing thing. You know, this is all to drum up, you know, sales for this book. That's what this has to be about. Oh, you can't find the author. It's, you know, this is some publicity stunt. Easy. I'm going to prove it to you. And just the bravado this guy has about his job is what drives him, you know, down this road of madness, you know, as far as where he's going, to where he kind of gets stuck in this, as opposed to some, you know, another insurance adjuster would look at it like, this is way too much. This is stupid. I'm going home. You know, hire somebody else. This guy's like, I have to prove it to you. I'm obsessed with this case. I have to prove it to you.
Yeah, and he says, early on that he believes everything has an angle to it.
Right.
And so he makes like the perfect character in a way, he almost stands in for reality itself that just refuses to believe anything it's not real. And it's like, as he gets broken down, reality does too. It's almost, once he starts to accept this thing, it's like reality. It starts to accept these changes. And then when he's finally broken down is when it's everything, breaks down at that point. So I just thought that part, worked really well. The idea that he was sort of the ultimate test for this, the ultimate one to bring the gospel forward. It's almost like we have the dark ones, the old ones as God, and then Sutter Kane as like Moses or somebody or Jesus. And then we have Trent as the person who's supposed to, like the disciple who's supposed to go out and, spread the gospel.
Right. Well, yeah, because he's supposed to carry that book, and he denies it at first, which again, I mean, jumping ahead, it's great how Sutter tells him, it's like, you need to take this with you. And he doesn't, but he kind of lets him know, like, you're not going to be able to escape this shit. Like, it's not happening. I'm God now. Like, I'm going to follow you everywhere. And even to the point where I'm sitting there laughing at when the book actually finds him at the motel, and his first inclination is to attack the clerk. And I guess the manager or his father, whoever it is that's working there, looks at him. He's like, nobody, I was here when it was dropped off, and kind of lets him know, like, you're going to grab me by the collar and try and shake me around, and because it's not going to happen. But it does deal with that whole idea of, if you are confronted with what is now the new reality, can you handle it? Are you going to accept it? And you see he's rejecting it early on. I'm sorry, James, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's pretty biblical in and of itself, trying to outrun it. And it keeps, you're forced to do it. Like, you might end up in a giant whale, but you're going to do what you're told, So,
what do you mean cut my son in half?
Exactly. No, I like that parallel because it is a religion, and it is, I mean, this has always been the thing with Lovecraft, it's its own, the old ones are their own religion. And I've always liked how the two kind of mirror each other, and how this is, the opinions expressed here are mine and mine alone. Just like the cult-like things that can happen because of religion or in the name of religion, and how that's always worked with Lovecraft and Lovecraftian stories. And so I think this one is just so blatantly trying to outrun your destiny, and I really think that plays in a lot with biblical symbolism and destiny in general, if you believe in such things.
Mm-hmm. It's also nicely metafictional too, with having the writer be the one who creates this reality, and then of course it toward the end it starts to overlap with the film. Like, we may be watching the thing, and we may be part of the breaking down of reality because we're watching it. And it's just a really nice way to kind of create this strange, surreal sense that, everything is falling apart.
Totally. And even that mix of, you're watching Sam Neill accept that he is in this story, and we're watching this and we're disconnected from it, but at the end we're not disconnected from it. We're also watching it the same way Sam Neill is. Right. And so that, I always love anything that kind of incorporates the audience like that without breaking the fourth wall and being weird about it. But, so.
Yeah, because there's never a moment where it's like, audience, you are participating. It's just something that may or may not hit you as you get toward the end.
Yeah, I don't think it would hold the same power if Sam Neill looked at us and he's like, "Can you believe this shit?"
That's what I was waiting for.
I mean, it might be a fun moment, but I don't think it would hold up the same way.
No.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people accept Deadpool, so maybe.
Yeah, but Deadpool's like that from the beginning. So.
Right.
Now that would be something, having Deadpool in the mouth of madness. So I would bet on Deadpool winning eventually.
Okay, I didn't want this to be remade, but you've convinced me.
Just have Ryan Reynolds in the back with another in the Deadpool suit, right, with an extra large buttered popcorn.
Oh, man. I wonder if anybody's come up with the idea that Deadpool may actually be God, since he's the one that can. He seems to be able to warp reality himself when he wants to and talk to us, the audience. So he may be the most supreme being on that planet.
It's going to be between him and Zach Morris then.
Oh, man. Deadpool wins that one hands down. All right, where would you guys like to go next?
I wrote down violent fandoms and religious extremism, but I think those are very good things to explore, because it doesn't even just have to be within a religion. You have, fandoms that can be like this. You have, whether we're talking about sci-fi, horror, sports, or even with concepts like nationalism. I mean, people can get pretty brutal about, what they see as belonging and what they see as not belonging. And the whole idea of what their reality is in comparison to yours. If it's something as simple as, I don't know, like the national anthem or something like that, as far as like the way you should behave or shouldn't behave or what it means, or, even looking further into the song or the original poem. And then questioning those things, because I've seen, especially in the post 9/11 world, we entered that period where you couldn't necessarily say something that was critical of America, because then you'd be seen as un-American. And it was kind of a rehashing of the 1950s, where if you didn't do things that were seen as American, that meant that you were un-American, and that meant that you might be communist, and we can't tolerate that. And it definitely starts to shape and reshape people's reality of who they can trust, who they can be around, what they feel safe saying in public or safe saying online. If you're sensible, you're thinking about what you're saying online and social media. So it was a really cool thing to think about. I mean, from a 1990s perspective, a 1990s film with a 21st century perspective, with the technology and with the different types of media, of how this would possibly affect the public, or how people would possibly turn on each other. Because there's that one moment where this one guy with these whacked out eyes, asks Trent, he's like, "Do you read Sutter Kane?" And it seems like whatever answer you were going to give him was going to be a wrong answer.
Right.
And that's kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's like their mantra or whatever. If you've ever seen Hot Fuzz, where the cult says for the greater good.
Yes.
So with them, it's like, do you read Sutter Kane?
Yeah, but even then, because you got me thinking about this, even then, it's if we were to go back to religion, then there becomes that thing of within different paths, different denominations, then there's even that argument over, what a certain piece of scripture means, or what relevance certain things have within the modern world. I mean, there are people who are very strict to the point where they don't use any electronic appliances on the Sabbath, or there's certain clothing they can't wear, or they can't use, there so many things, can't drink alcohol. I mean, there's so many things that are there, but you see these people as all part of the same religion, but not necessarily the same path within that religion. So I wonder how, if any of these Sutter Kane people, who I guess would be casual fans, would argue with each other over which book is the real revelation. Is it the final book, or is it something else? Because I would love to get in the head of some of those people to see exactly what it was that was driving them to that point, to where they were fighting with people over the amount of books, or not having books prepared or ready for sale, and fighting each other over these books and this need to read it and then possibly interpret it however they're going to interpret it.
Yeah, I think if it was going to be made today, they hit the note of toxic fandom a lot harder, and because that's just grown so much since this movie was made. Mm-hmm. So I think that'd probably be a bigger element. I wouldn't be surprised if there was actually a toxic fan character that would be a bigger part of the story throughout. We'd
probably have protesters outside of the bookstore and all kinds of crazy stuff. But no, I look at how it drove people crazy. And I love that this isn't answered, because we get an answer of what drives Trent crazy, which is the fundamental realization that he doesn't exist. He comes to realize he's a character, and when this story is over, he will just no longer be there, just like he wasn't there before this moment, right? But like all of these people that are out there, yes, they're in the story as well, but that can't be what drove them as crazy. Maybe some of them, but not all of them. And I like that it's left up to just being a question, because it could be completely individualized. It could be so many different things. And it also just goes back to Lovecraft's always doing this thing your mind can't handle, you know? And I feel like if it was redone today, people would work too hard to answer that question. And I feel like one of the reasons this holds us so much is that that question isn't answered for everybody. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, the closest we get is when Trent has just started to read some of the novels, and he's talking to his boss and the guy who's hired him since he's freelance. And he says, the thing about these books is they kind of get to you after a while. They're sort of better written than you expect. Right. And he talks about it like he's, just a little dazed or a little lost. It's a very different kind of tone, vocal tone for that character than what we'd seen before. I mean, there's none of the brash confidence. There's, it's almost like he's kind of thinking about the mystery of it as well. So it kind of, I think it really establishes that there is just this power of some sort that comes through the words.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that really points out to me as well. This couldn't have been an easy admission for him to make. Like under normal circumstances, his bravado and his image wouldn't allow him to say, I was scared of a horror book. Like, he's spent all this time crapping on the idea of this genre, and he just matter-of-factly says they're written better than you would expect. And
he's made fun of the audience for it too, the people that go crazy for it.
Yeah,
and they can't believe that they give a damn about this kind of shit, but then he's starting to be affected by it.
That's way more powerful now.
And the other thing I really like about it is that the time when it came out was just right before my first daughter was born. I think she's born in 95, and I think this thing came out in 94. Yes. I saw it after she was born. I didn't see it. I think I saw it when it came out on cassette way back when. But one of the things that I was exploring with my own fiction was this idea of like the inner made outer, like the psychological landscape, not literally like somebody's fears or dreams coming to life, but like images like that or subconscious things would be like literally there. And one of the things I liked was how this movie did that. It does this kind of, the inner does become the outer until everything's kind of blurred. And it's still one of the few movies that, I thought at the time, it's like, this is like the kind of stuff I'm trying to do. So it was, I wouldn't say it's like, a movie that is like if somebody made a movie of like one of my books, but kind of, sort of. So it still resonates for me that, I can't go back and like tell you, how did this exactly affect, how I wrote stories, but I'm sure it did. I'm sure it was hugely influential.
Yeah, for me, it was, so I was in high school when it came out, and I must have seen it in 96 because I saw it as a senior. I was at a friend's house and we watched it, and I knew that I wanted to write at that point, and I was writing, crap like you do when you're starting out, and I write crap today. But like, it really hit this note with me of just like, this is how horror and terror should feel. This is that feeling that I had hours after I watched it. That's the thing that I want to push into people, and that's the thing I want to trigger with people. And so I cannot understate how influential this was on my writing, even though I don't necessarily write stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that since you brought up the boy / old man on the almost corpse on the bicycle, I think that's so effective because it shows that something is really wrong, and it doesn't attack or anything. Whatever that entity is, it doesn't attack. It's just there. And it kind of acknowledges, looks over and acknowledges you, almost like, hey, fellow traveler, or whatever, or kind of a smile like you don't know what you're getting into, or you're not sure what's happening. But I think that's one of the, it's really scary for that reason. If something attacks you and touches you, it's physical. And at that point, then, even if it's nightmarish, it's a physical thing you can fight somehow. Not stuff like that. He's going to come by and then, oh, look, now he's got, what's her name? Linda, I think, the editor. Oh, look, she's riding on the back now because she's been like completely taken over by this force. And wait, he's young. Wait, he's old. What the hell? And, so it's like, I love stuff like that. I love stuff that just, because I think the ultimate loss of control is that reality isn't what you think it is.
I mean, that's a beautiful definition. Yeah. Going with definitions, this flies into exactly what I was about to say. My definition of the horror that I like to write is that feeling that something's wrong when everyone else around you thinks everything's okay. Mm-hmm. That terrifies me more than anything. And that's what I'm always trying to instill into stuff. Even if I'm writing, I don't know, a crazy monster attacking everybody, I want somebody to have that feeling that they're the only one that knows something's wrong.
Right.
Because that terrifies the shit out of me all the time.
Yeah, and it's such a primal experience for people. I mean, we never know when our body's going to betray us or how. We don't know when, like in a lot of movies, you're just driving along in the car, the characters are talking, and suddenly like somebody, hits them out of nowhere and it changes the whole direction of the story or the scene. Things like that happen to us in real life all the time. And it's just, we have to spend a lot of time trying not to imagine this axe, hovering right above us, getting ready to fall at any moment just to get through our day. And so I think that things like that in stories, like any way that you do the isolated character who knows or fears anyway that something's going wrong and can't convince anybody else, I think it really plugs into just a primal experience of being human.
Well, I was just thinking about The Shining. And when I think of that movie, not the book, the movie, it's all the images of discomfort, but they're not attacking, like you just said, like the twins standing at the end of the hall or the bathtub lady. I don't know what the hell to call her, but that, like, it's an image. It's just there. And that's so much more terrifying. It's so much more uncomfortable because it shouldn't be happening. But I was thinking about what you said about attacking and how that becomes real. And when I think something like The Shining, I think of those moments. I don't think of the actual physical assaults between Jack and his wife or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, the image of Jack Nicholson is him busting through that door and saying, "Here's Johnny."
Yeah,
and he's not attacked yet. I mean, he's just a threat. I think that's just a good suspense building technique too. I mean, they do it in Jaws, where the shark is. I mean, we see the shark kill people, but the shark isn't going near our heroes. I mean, they have to go out into its territory for them to even be threatened. If they just stayed on the beach, they'd be fine. So
they just closed the beach. Gosh.
That's right. That's right.
Such common sense.
But no, it's even like when Jaws attacks things. Those aren't the scenes we remember. We remember the tension and the creepy factor. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that thing in the theater. I was like probably in 5th grade, and I begged my dad to take me. And people who didn't see it at that time, it's hard to imagine how the impact movies like this had on audiences when you've already experienced so much art that's kind of been built on it. But I had never experienced suspense like that, the way it wound up. And so I was terrified. And then when we get to the end where, Jaws flips out of the water and lands on the orca, and, as Jaws start working like a machine as Quint slides down to him, I thought to myself, I cannot believe I was scared of this thing for this long because it looked so damn stupid. And its lower jaw was even kind of going sideways, like, because the shark was, the robot or whatever wasn't quite built that well. And I was so wound up with tension that I burst out screaming with laughter. I literally fell onto the floor of the theater and I ruined that moment for everybody in that damn theater. And my dad was like, "Oh my God." And I don't think he ever took me to a movie again after that. But yeah, it is the, the buildup. I mean, as much as, and that's one of the things that I think is bad about CGI is you throw some money at the production and you can show the monster in all kinds of detail. And it's really cool if your monster's Godzilla and you want, you're not trying to be scared. You're trying to have fun, but it's not so good if you're trying to scare people. Still, the thing where he's being chased by like the old ones coming through the dark corridor or whatever, that's still terrifying. Just the glimpses and the flashes. I mean, that is just brilliantly directed and edited.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, because there's still enough mystery left with those beings. They're not. My age group. I think when Aliens came out, I believe I saw that when the movie theater. I might have seen it on VHS, but not being able to see the full xenomorph was enough for me as a kid. But by the time it's at the end of the movie and you see the full one, I'm kind of like, it's kind of the same feeling. It's not that scary anymore. It's not that scary because now I see all of it. You're out in the open. Like there's nowhere for it to come from to scare you or anything like that. And the same thing with the various demons that you see in this film. You don't get to see a glimpse. I think if you'd gotten to see them full on, it would kind of be like Tim Curry's portrayal of the devil in Legend, where there are parts where like, oh shit, he's scary, but then when you finally see him, there are people that now joke about it, like, damn, Tim Curry was sexy in that movie. Just that kind of that fear and everything is not there. It's kind of like I actually like the aesthetic that he gives off because. There's I love the fact that they keep that mystery behind some of those creatures, even like the police officer that has is a demon or demonic at one point in one of Trent's visions, or at least breaks from reality. He sees part of it, but then that mob descends on him. But you still have that mystery of everything that's happening. And the mystery of what these people look like, are they, fanatics? Like, what is going on here? You don't need, every question answered. And that's one of the strengths of this film is the terror that you have. You get a glimpse of it and you don't have your fears like reassured in any way, or at least the safety reassured in any way, because you're thinking about what's coming next.
Right. I think that's why a lot of people, they love the comfort of the explanation at the end of a movie, because it's suddenly safe again. They've been through this ride, and if there's, they've been scared or whatever, but now it's like, okay, we're giving form, we're giving shape to this thing. We're going to tell you what the rules are of it or what the reason was behind it. And then it's okay. And in a way, it's like the audience conquers the thing once they understand it. And I love it when that does not happen. Some of my favorite movie experiences have been movies where people react like that. Like when I saw Wolf Creek, the first one in the theater, it's such a strange, to American audiences, it's such a strange pattern. Nothing happens for an hour. And then when the killings start happening, they go from the worst killing to the second worst killing to one that's not so bad. They don't build the way you think they're going to build. And when that movie was over, some guy in the back stood up and said, "What the hell was that?" as loud as he could. And I'm like, this is fantastic. This is what horror movies should do. When I saw Mother in the theater, I was afterward, I went to the restroom and I'm standing at the urinal and this guy comes next to me and says, "What the hell was that?" As he's peeing. He's asking me what the hell this movie's about. What do you think about it? And so we're talking about it in there. And then when he washes his hand and leaves, he goes out and talks to somebody else. He's like, "What, did you see that? What did you think that was?" And I'm like, this is absolutely perfect. It's the best, it's the best way to keep people engaged in art in a lot of ways, to make them part of it. But like, I love the movie Sinister, but I was so, once they go to the professor who can explain it all, it's like, oh yeah, he's this ancient god. He was named this. And then, he does this. And I'm like, no, don't tell me that. Leave Mr. Boogie as some kind of weird ass thing. We don't know what it is. You take the power away from something when you name it and explain it.
And Sinister's so powerful as it is. So like, it was such a good movie. And yeah, I feel like if you left that, it would be so much harder and just really hit you.
Yeah. And I wonder, if that's something the studio said you got to put in, because it almost seems in a way tacked on a bit. Yeah, it's like I tell people, Bigfoot and UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster are cool because we don't know if they're real. Because once they're real, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster are animals in a zoo. And, they won't be any more exotic to people than an elephant is. Right. And aliens are just like, people next door. They're just farther away once we get to know them. It'd be like Star Trek, where aliens are no big deal. It's the mystery that is more important than anything else.
Yeah, I always go to Jack the Ripper. Everybody is so convinced they want to know who was actually Jack the Ripper. And I'm like, no, you don't. If we ever had 100% conclusive evidence, where's the fun?
Right.
Like, now it's just some guy who killed some people. Yeah. That's not what we hold on to.
Right. Yeah. And all the images when people draw him, he's always a shadowy figure because we don't know, whose face to put in it.
Plus, we'd all be like, who the hell's that?
Right.
And there would be groups dedicated to him on social media that were trying to exonerate him, and I mean, then you'd have his fanatic fans,
right?
Because I just watched the Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker documentary on Netflix, and I might have mentioned this to James before, but it was just funny watching it with my wife because I'm sitting there. We're in the second episode, and I think I fell asleep on one part of it. I woke up. I was like, "Did they catch Richard Ramirez yet?" She's like, "Who?" I was like, "The Night Stalker." She looked at me. She's like, "I didn't know who the fuck he was. Why did you say something?" And I'm just like, I was like, everybody knows who Richard. She didn't grow up in the States, so I looked at her. I was like, "You're obsessed with serial killer stories and all this CSI stuff, and you didn't know who Richard Ramirez was?" And when they talk about him as the Night Stalker, it's a whole lot more terrifying for the people in California and then other places where he's committing these murders than when he becomes Richard Ramirez. Now it's like you've got a face to it, as opposed to we have this sketch out about who he is on all these walls and telephone poles and things like that, to where he makes people fearful for their lives, their safety, because there is no rhyme or reason to any of the murders, any of the sexual assaults, anything that he's doing. And I mean, that's key when you're talking about keeping the mystery of these horror villains, monsters, whoever it is, because once you have this revelation as to who they are or what they are, you don't care as much, or in some cases you care way too much. As some of his fans would demonstrate. But as far as the public, there's not that much of a mystery anymore. It's kind of like, oh, this is the guy we were looking for. Cool. All right. Who's the next one?
Well, I think that's why the first Halloween is so brilliant, because there's no explaining Michael Myers at all, as Loomis goes into great detail about pretty often. And then those last few shots at the end where it's just different places and he's just breathing like he could be anywhere. And so it's the same kind of thing. I sometimes try to imagine like, well, they kind of sort of did this in the last reboot, where, I mean, Michael's a serial killer that's been in custody for 20 years. And I'm thinking, they have pictures of him on the web or whatever, probably, and websites devoted to him. And in that world, I would imagine that he would not be the same sort of boogeyman kind of figure that he is, in that first movie.
Yeah, probably just the Laurie Strode because she's dealing with that trauma from that event. But everybody else, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, maybe in the town. But even in the town, if I remember right from the first one, he's just, he's sort of just a legend to them. But a legend like there was this guy once who went nuts and killed his family, like you might hear in any kind of town. So, yeah, it becomes a very personal thing for her, and that's cool. But it's very different than that sort of almost cosmic mystery that Loomis is going on about.
We did an episode on Halloween, and we did the newest Halloween, the one called Halloween that wasn't in 1978. And Jerry Smith from Bloody Disgusting was on, and it was just, he really put Michael Myers into perspective for me, because I've never enjoyed Michael Myers. And he really talked about how in that first film, Michael just represents trauma, and how trauma can attack anybody for no fucking reason at all. You just get targeted and you're stuck with it for life. And then he brought it into Laurie and her current life 40 years later, and how she still has all this trauma, and Michael's literally the embodiment of it. and it made me love Michael Myers. So what I'm saying here is go check out that episode, everybody. But no, but really, just the way you're talking about it right now, just that whole, it could be anywhere and we don't need the explanation. I mean, that's what horror should be. Horror should leave you questioning shit, and it should leave you uneasy. And I'm guilty of it myself. I've tried to solve way too much stuff when I don't need to. And I've kind of taken on the writing advice of, I know the answers, so I'm happy, but they probably don't make it into my story.
What I found interesting was when Trent and Styles get to the town, right? They finally get there, and again, you've got this great mix of horror and humor in this, because Styles is being just hit with all these visions of things as she's going through what ends up being the tunnel, and it's all dark. They get to the end of the tunnel, it's light out, and Trent, who's been sleeping, wakes up and is like, oh, I must have slept through the night. We're here. You know, it's kind of like, and you've just, as an audience member, you've just seen this woman like damn near have a panic attack. Anybody who's been on a road trip, we've all had those moments where like you almost got run off the road, or there was a car accident in front of you, and whoever was riding with you, you know, you happen to swerve and they wake up like, oh my God, what's with your drive? You know, they have some reaction because they have no idea what was going on outside of the car. So I thought it was a cool thing to, one, have humor still embedded into the film, but then also to make this cool transition of, we don't know where the hell this place is, we can't find it, bam, all of a sudden we're here. And then as a viewer, that makes you again start to question, like, this is not going to be a normal road trip. This is not going to be a visit that's going to end with some type of resolution that's beneficial to Trent or even to Styles for that matter. But you know, it was a great setup. But what did the two of you, or what were some of your impressions of that town when they first arrived?
Well, I really like the transition scene you're talking about, because if it was a book, it would be like maybe the first scene, it's not from Trent's point of view, it's from Styles' point of view. And the audience gets clued into what's happening in a way that Trent doesn't. It's our first time where we have a kind of an answer. We know this isn't a scam. We pretty much figured it wasn't. We pretty much figured bad things were happening. But now we know reality warps are happening, because that transition, you know, it goes dark and then everything's dark and then there's no sound from the tires because she's kind of flying over whatever. She looks down and sees like a weird mist or clouds and some quiet lightning flashes in it. And then there's the almost like the boards of the bridge appear. And then, it's only been dark for who knows how many hours. And suddenly, you know, it's daylight when she gets there, and then Trent wakes up. But it's this wonderful moment where the audience is kind of in on it in a way that they weren't before. Like our perspective shifts from, you know, wanting to solve things along with Trent to wanting to see what the hell this does to Trent. It's almost like we're ready for his breakdown, or at least his psychological dismantling as a character. Mm-hmm. It's the first time we get a godlike perspective. So I just think that scene's so effective.
And I think it brings us into the beginning of we're the audience, because we've followed him, like you said, right? So normally this would be like it's his story and we're following him. That's how most movies work. But what this scene does is it erases that, and now we're just the audience. And I think that really plays into what I was talking about earlier with the end, with him watching the film and how he's the audience and we're the audience and we're on the same level with him. In this place, we're above him because we know stuff he doesn't know. And like you said, it's for the first time. And it's almost kind of just really well done, in my opinion, because it doesn't feel jarring. It's put with other stuff that feels jarring so that we don't really pay attention to the shift. It's almost like a street magic. Like it's a really nice distraction as things shift. And I love that it happens with the actual shift, night to day, going into the town. Like it happens at that exact moment. And that's where everything changes. And I think that is such a nice little, just a way to bring it all together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really, for me, my favorite moment, the silence is my favorite moment as she's driving. My second favorite moment is when you hear the boards almost like they're being assembled of the floorboards of the bridge or whatever. And then she just drives across it. And it's like that small little tactile detail makes it seem real. And I think if you're ever going to write about unreal stuff or, make a movie about it or whatever, I think those little tactile details are so unsettling because, if you could like hear that sound and then as the car, started to move onto those boards and you could feel the vibrations and the movement where you couldn't before, I think that would be just even more unsettling because your body would be saying, this is real. And your mind is like, no, no, please don't let this be real. I also think it's cool
beautiful.
that the town, it's supposed to be a small town, but it's almost like this giant world all on its own. I mean, the church is all by itself, the black church or whatever, and it's huge. And other areas just seem to loom so much larger in a way, even more larger in a lot of ways than New York did at the beginning.
One of my favorite parts is with the church. And it's when Sam Neill looks out the window and he's like, if this was real, there'd be a giant church there. And it's so humorous. Like, it's so funny when she's like, it's this window over here. She says it better than that. She's like, if you paid attention, you'd know it's over here. But I love that it's a really humorous moment that's not played for humor.
Right.
Like, it is the epitome, at least in this film, of humor and horror together, which is one of my absolute favorite things, as anyone who listens to me knows. And it's so great because it makes me laugh, but it makes me incredibly uneasy because we just made it real.
Yeah, and it may be the first time that we start to get this sense that, Trent is not necessarily a being with his own self-will, or even maybe a being at all, because, it's like the detail is in the book and she knows it. And so it's like that sort of existential fear that people, have, or it runs through religion. It's like, are what we doing pre-planned? Is it pre-planned? Do we have free will? What does that mean? I used to have like religious debates with a friend of mine in high school. And he was saying that, I was asking him about, when do you have, he's a Christian. And I was asking him, how do you get salvation or whatever? And he's like, oh, anybody who's heard the word of God and turns away from it won't be they won't be saved. And I said, well, what about people that are born in Muslim countries or born to a family who's atheist? They don't choose that. And he's like, and I said, does God choose that? And if God doesn't, is it random? In which case God is choosing to allow it to be random? How does this work? And he's like, so there's that whole, is it predestined? Is it not? How much free will do we have? In Thomas Ligotti's his nonfiction book, I'm trying to remember the title of it, but it's a nonfiction book where he's talking about, consciousness and all kinds of things. There's this, he talks about one idea that consciousness is an illusion, that humans are not really conscious. And I'm like, oh, great. I don't need to be thinking that right now. I don't need to be thinking that I'm an illusion of some sort that just is carrying my seed around in the hopes that it'll get spread. And that's really about it, until I become fertilizer. And those kind of thoughts are horrible thoughts. And so it's really cool that there's this humor that in that first scene where that happens, but it's also one where when he looks and we look, it's like the humor starts to kind of drain at that point and becomes, not a big chill, but it's still a little chill, but it works so well.
Yeah, it really does. Just really fast, I just want to add to your conversations about religion. I went to Catholic grade school and high school, which is why I'm not Catholic anymore. And I used to fight with priests because I would ask questions, and I was half being an ass and half really wanting to know, do you have an answer for this? And the one that got me kicked out of class for like 2 days, I said, what is free will? And he was basically talking about how humans have free will. And it's one of the things the angels were so mad about, blah, 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 blah. And I said, so Lucifer didn't have free will when he turned? So he was doing God's work. And he's doing God's work now. And that got me kicked out for several days.
Yeah, there's this movie from the 80s or 90s. It's I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's the main character is a demon, and she goes to Earth for some reason, I forget what. But the early parts of it are in hell with her family, and they are still servants of God, and they are fulfilling their role for the creator, and she takes God's name in vain, and they're very upset. And it was such a cool way to look at demons, is that they are not being punished necessarily or anything. It's just, this is their role. This is the way they serve.
I find that stuff fascinating. I think that's cool. I'm going to try to find this film you're talking about.
Yeah, I wish I could think of
Yeah, it's one people write about and talk about, so you shouldn't have too much trouble finding it.
Cool. We can go back to the film. I'm sorry, Don. I didn't mean to derail it.
No. There is no derailing. There is no derailing, because I'm sitting there thinking man, we would have all gotten along in high school together.
I was a way bigger jerk then, so you know how bad I am now, and it was worse. So
never mind.
So, one of the things that really creeps me out, I talked about this this horror and terror that still resonates today, right? This painting on the wall that changes.
Yes.
That is one of those things that messes with me, because although I logically know better, supposedly, I feel like this has happened to me a lot of times. I see stuff in paintings that isn't there later, or I'm walking through hallways back when I had an office a year ago, and I'm was that painting always there, or has this picture changed? When I walk by it every single day. And I love how Styles always notices it. And Styles is very in tune with how it keeps changing. And he kind of notices later, and it builds from there. But the initial reaction that Styles has watching it really messes with me. I love this part.
Yeah, this is something I always tell people too. It's the horror comes from people's perception of whatever the thing is. And so it's Styles' reaction that makes that painting, scary, and the changes in it. If somebody just, one of the Marx Brothers was there making fun of it, or Deadpool was there, the painting is still changing, and it could still be, a diabolical force or whatever, but without somebody's perception, it's nothing. It's like I tell people, if there's a monster wandering around in a field all by itself, it's not scary. It's only scary when somebody's there to perceive it, and perceive it as threatening. Yep. It's like in Aliens. The Marines don't view xenomorphs. They don't know how bad they're going to be when they encounter them, but they don't view them as monsters. They're not afraid. It's just another bug hunt as far as they're concerned. So it's the horror needs to be filtered through a particular character's perceptions to be effective. And on screen, an actor has to do that. I mean, the director can, the set designer, the lighting, all the music, all that too. But I really think it's through the character that makes it the most effective.
I would definitely agree with that. What about you, Don? Are you scared of paintings changing? Do you have a painting of me in your house and it changes sometimes?
No. I actually have a live cam that goes into your house, and I just watch you when you sleep. But
God, that would be so boring. A live cam of me, I would always be in the spare bedroom at my computer, either for my day job or writing. And then occasionally I would just go lay down and go to sleep.
I think definitely a great point as far as the reaction is what drives the horror for that scene. But I think as an audience member, we've had those movies before where an image in the background moves, and it's frustrating because you're watching it happen. You know it's happening, but no one in the film is reacting to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a different feeling with that compared to this, where there is one person who sees it change, is definitely affected by it. And as you said, James, your biggest fear is, or at least one of the big things that you like in horror, is you notice something and everybody else is behaving like it's normal, or just not even noticing that it's there.
Yeah.
And I think that's it could have worked on either one, but I love the fact that Styles again is responding to this, because at first, I mean, you have, I guess you have a little bit of an attachment with her because she's not cocky and arrogant like Trent is. So you almost see her as an innocent in this, as opposed to if it happened to Trent, you're kind of expecting him to be a little bit impacted by something, or a little bit bothered by something. But with her, with the scene coming into town, and of course there with the portrait, and of course later things involving Sutter Kane, you have a little bit more sympathy for the things that are happening to her as opposed to Trent.
Yeah, I think that's true. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, his excuse is that he thinks this is like going to be a Sutter Kane theme park once the book is released, and people will be coming here to check out all these exhibits or whatever. So if he did see the painting early on, to him it would just be a special effect.
It's like, oh, that's a good trick you pulled off there.
Right. Because he says that to some of them, like, "Oh, you do such a good job here."
Yeah, about their acting. Yeah,
yeah, and they stay in character basically, as far as he's concerned.
He just treated it like it was Tombstone.
Yeah, and that's what's great about the husband, the naked husband, being like handcuffed to his wife's leg, and she kicks him or whatever, because we get to see that, and Trent doesn't. So we know that this is anybody who might have thought there was some kind of act going on. No, this just horrible psychotic stuff is happening.
That is a really good nod to the audience.
Yeah,
and then the fact there's a sweet old lady that's doing it too.
Yeah, that was great.
My first thought, I took myself out of a horror mood at that moment. I was thinking like, Granny's into some kinky stuff. All right.
Good God.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Good for her.
And I think it's really cool how later she becomes the image that's on the cover of the previous book, the Hobbs End Horror or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she's still scary. I mean, we already know what that image is. We sort of expect it to show up, but it's so well done. I was just thinking, since I was racking my brain to come up with other themes. Usually when I watch a horror movie, I prefer it to not be a star that's well known, because I don't believe that Harrison Ford, if anything bad's going to happen to him and his character dies, or if he's evil, so what? It's always still Harrison Ford. It's always an actor. But I'd much rather it be like an independent film where I don't know anybody. And so they're not an actor to me. They can be the character in the story more easily. And Sam Neill, I think this was after Jurassic Park, maybe right before. I don't remember, but he wasn't as famous, as he is now. And so that really didn't bother me, but I was aware of who he was. And I just realized that didn't bother me at all. Maybe it, just for me anyway, helped play into the movie, seeing like an actor in it, who is subsumed by this stuff. It might have played into the metafictional part of it for me.
I often feel the same way. Like if there's horror, I want it to be people I don't really know. Like how Star Wars, since you brought up Harrison Ford, Star Wars had a bunch of people nobody knew at the time, Right. And one of the things I like about that is I'm not going, oh, you paid that person a lot of money. They're definitely not dying anytime soon.
Right.
But also just you don't get like all that baggage that comes with it. Like you expect, I don't know, I'll pick on Nicolas Cage. Like Cage is going to be Cage, or like Keanu Reeves is definitely going to do this thing, or, it, you don't have all that extra baggage with it. And you're right. It doesn't bother me at all with Sam Neill. Like I actually kind of like it more. I hadn't thought about it, but as I'm thinking about it, I like it more than if it was some random person, and I don't even know why.
Yeah, he might just be one of those actors that just seems genuine in what he does. Because there are some actors that they just seem to fit the story they're in. It's really hard to explain, but they don't stand apart from it. They're woven into it in a way that just feels natural. And I'm not sure that every actor can do that. I mean, I remember like reading about the difference between actors and stars. Like once you become a star, I think I read this in William Golding, I think one of his memoirs about, Hollywood, where he had written this really cool script for some star. I can't think of who it was. And he was all excited to do it because it probably had the character becoming an addict or something really dramatic. But then, of course, he said, no, I can't. His agent told him he couldn't do it. And he changed his mind. And Golding got the advice from somebody who says, look, stars will never play weak. They can't. Their image as a star is like an image of strength. One way, it doesn't have to be physical strength, but it's an image of strength. And so they're kind of, they kind of already have, like you're saying, baggage. they've already got an image that they bring with them. But, character actors, they don't have to do that necessarily. They're able to go ahead or to blend, like Gary Oldman's able to blend into anything.
Oh
like
man,
a chameleon. It's like I see Gary Oldman, I'm like, oh, is there going to be good acting in this movie? But I don't think of anything other than he's going to blend into this movie and practically be invisible as Gary Oldman.
Yeah.
Right.
No, he's definitely the go-to explanation with that too. I mean, there's other people that do it, but he is the king of that. And even when you can see Gary Oldman there, he's not like any other Gary Oldman character.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. But going back to Nick Cage, I kind of feel like not always, but Cage kind of doesn't have that thing about strength you were just talking about. Like, if anything, I feel like he picks a lot of things where he is vulnerable or injured or stuff like that. And I'm not really going anywhere with this. I'm just fascinated, like, thinking about that. So yeah. But you're right. Most people do have that thing where they can't be touched once they reach a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say the movie captured that easily with the line, I have to. He wrote me this way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why, where you get that difference of the character actors versus someone who's a star or sees himself as a star, because it's kind of like, look, I'm gonna merge with this or meld myself into this script and in this movie and become what you wanted it to be. And again, I can't imagine anybody else playing the character of Trent besides Sam Neill, not just because he did such a great job, but, well, hell, because he did such a great job of it,
Yeah, there's something about the way he acts where it's almost like stars if it was a stage, they step too far down to the audience, they stand out from the other characters. But Sam Neill always stays back with the rest of them. He doesn't stand apart from the scenes he's in. I don't know. I just think that works well. And I was also thinking, though, that they do have a giant star in it, at least a giant star at the time. Charlton Heston plays the publisher.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
He's only in 2 scenes. I remember I didn't know he was in it when I was watching it the first time. And I was like, how the hell did Charlton Heston get into this movie? But he seems to work just fine as, I think the publisher name's Harlow, maybe, whatever. And he's there at the beginning and the end. And I don't know. Maybe he's an exception for me. Maybe it's because he doesn't do a whole lot in the movie. I don't know. In some ways, it's almost like he's kind of, a sort of almost a godlike character on the other side, kind of. I don't know. Maybe he gets defeated at the end because he says the movie's coming out. Too late, dude. The movie's coming out in 2 weeks.
I just love how he's the publisher and Trent's like, have you read it? He's like, no, I've never read any of his books.
He knows they make money. He doesn't have to read
exactly.
it.
He's got to he gives you an inside look at how it is. It's like, no, he makes this is $1 billion franchise. I'm not reading any of the books. I don't have time to do it, but I do have time to cash those checks.
Right.
I love his second scene when he's, Sam Neill is coming and he thinks he's still on a mission to deliver the book, and Charlton Heston's character is just like, what are you talking about? You gave me the book months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like a really strong scene that linear reality is completely broken for Trent.
Yeah. And it's so, I don't want to say easy, but I'm going to go with easy. It's such an easy scene to accomplish something so complex. And it just plays out so perfectly because that's how it would be in real life. Like if you have a mental illness or something, or dementia, or just anything where you have these time spans that are just gone, right? Like that's how it plays out. It's just, no, it's Tuesday today. Mm-hmm. And I like that this isn't overdone because Charlton Heston's character doesn't understand what's happening to him. He's never read the book, so he wouldn't know.
Right.
And, but also just like, he's just having another conversation and he's a little confused, but it's nothing major to him.
Yeah, and it's a really great moment too, because it's, it looks like Sam Neill's escaped. He's back in New York and, he's already defeated. I mean, everything is like the air just is let out of him at that point. It's almost like that moment in Watchmen where, they find out Ozymandias has set off his plan, 25, 30 minutes before they got there because he knew they were coming. Why would he wait? And it's just this horrible, and that kind of pulls your, like metafictionally, it pulls the rug out from under an audience because they're expecting there to be a confrontation point or a point where the hero at least has a chance to try to defeat the thing. And Charlton Heston's like, dude, there is no climax to this story. It's all done. It's all unraveled completely.
So good. Like that scene just holds so much power for me. But let's talk about how we get there. So I want to go back to Sutter Kane the first time we see him, because I think this is a great visual. I believe it's the first time we see him, right? When the church doors open.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just, man, like, I mean, it's a GIF according to Don, a GIF according to me, that I see constantly when people want to like present that like wow factor. And I mean, rewatching it, when it hit, I was just like, this is such a cool visual because he is the god of this world. And, you know, he's created it, he's controlling it, he's whatever. And I love that he's coming out of a church. And then, of course, the symbolism of cults and fanatics and all of that stuff. Just like, this is such a powerful little moment for me. And I love it. And it lasts, what, like 2 seconds? It's great. I don't know.
It just sears right into your mind. And they cast a wonderful actor for that, just in terms of his physicality and the way he holds himself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's not like classically handsome. So you have this strange sort of, you know, there's like an attraction to him, but not exactly a repulsion, but his features are not, you know, like classically handsome. So you get this very strange sort of, you know, attraction, repulsion from him. You get the wild hair a little bit. So he looks artistic, but also dangerous. It's just great.
And he just exudes confidence and power. He hasn't said anything. He hasn't done anything. He literally stands there.
It'd be great to know what kind of direction the Carpenter gave him. Because to do that, to just stand there, I mean, a lot of it may be the editing and everything, or all the other stuff that, you know, artists can do with a movie, but just the fact that he can be there for 2 seconds or whatever and project that to the point where, you know, almost 30 years later, he's still an image that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing.
I need to make something that good, huh, Don?
Look, I just want to make something that's going to make everybody go crazy and riot because they don't have enough of my books.
Oh, man.
That day's not happening.
Given what you write, I think if people riot, it'll be for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, you're right.
But veering away from politics. No. So another Sutter Kane moment that got me, I mentioned earlier that jump scares are really easy to hit me with. And that moment where Styles walks into his inner sanctum or whatever you want to call it, and that hand shoots down and grabs her, I totally jumped out of my chair. But I love that it brings that horror element back, and he's surrounded by something that definitely shouldn't be in a normal church.
Right.
And that's always a Lovecraft thing. There's several stories of that. But how do you guys feel about his power once he's actually talking and stuff? Do you think that it still comes across the same as that opening image, or how do you feel about him at this point?
For me, it did. I mean, for me, it stayed the same. I mean, I don't think that he needed to remain silent, and because he had, you know, I would say a distinctive voice. That voice helped. It also his mannerisms and everything that helped carry that sense of this guy is in complete control. You know, the funniest moment, or at least the only moment that kind of takes away from the interaction between Trent and I almost said Jurgen Prochnow because using his real name, Sutter Kane, was when, you know, Trent gets pissed off and he's like, "Your books suck." I'm like, and it's kind of like, no, you're gonna be carrying, you know, my word back. You're gonna be carrying my manuscript. You're gonna be doing this. It's all been foretold. It's all been leading up to this. You know, it seemed like you're not going to be able to tell him no, and he's not doing it in a funny way, in a goofy way. It's so matter of factly, like, here's my manuscript. You're gonna take it. That's it. The world is going to start over here with the children.
Yeah, and I did like his voice too. I mean, the first time I saw it, it came as such a surprise because I didn't know the actor. and it just seemed to be such a good sort of like almost like a special effect in itself, just to make him, more like otherworldly, I guess. And then if I remember right, his motions are really controlled. He stands still a lot, which in a way it makes him seem kind of unreal, like an image on his, because eventually he tears himself apart. I mean, that's like the opening of the door, like he is on a book cover or something. And I just think that works so well.
I really like what you just said, like he's on a book cover. I mean, that really sums it up. Like, he doesn't move a lot, and he's an image. And wow, that is a really good way to describe that. So let's jump to him ripping himself open. Like, this is the thing that I look forward to the whole time I'm watching, because I love these scenes at the end. And the thing I really noticed this time is that it's an effect that held up. Like, I didn't think that it looked super crappy. I mean, this was 94. So I could easily be in one of those films that are where I'm like, yep, that's 94 for you. I don't feel that way with this.
Or it's like when you're watching Hellraiser and it's time for the weird drawn on power rays that are,
oh man,
they're just awful. They're just awful. I love that movie, but oh my god, yeah, I think the image works great. I don't know if there's any effect in this thing that it doesn't work for me. I mean, I think maybe the older woman when she sprouts her tentacles, that effect looks a little mechanical, maybe, but that's okay. It makes it look even more unreal and strange in a lot of ways.
That's a good point, because that that totally works with it. So, yeah, wow. I'm thinking of we just watched Color Out of Space, and they do a tentacle body horror mix kind of thing. And I don't know that it'll hold up. Like, it holds up right now because it came out last year, so those are the graphics we're used to. And a lot of times we have stuff like that, and then 10, 15, 20 years later, we're like, yeah, that was the graphics at the time, and so I'm kind of wondering how that'll feel compared to practical effects and stuff like that. I'm always a big proponent of practical effects just because they don't age the same way.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if they'll ever get to the point where the stuff actually fools your brain. I mean, they've gotten really good in the superhero movies of, so you think Iron Man's really flying around or whatever, but still, it doesn't quite feel right to me. I don't know if it's ever going to feel right. Maybe for somebody who grows up on that stuff, to them that it looks perfect or whatever, seems to fit, or they don't question it. But they're still, I mean, even as good as they've gotten with CGI, I mean, it doesn't have that tactical reality to it.
I wonder if like virtual reality and stuff will make a difference with that, because you'd be more immersed in it, like you're like standing there. And I mean, right now, the special effects with that would not hold up. But I'm saying in the future, I wonder if that will help with that.
Maybe. I mean, Pixar does a good job of creating a whole world where, given, the limitations of what they're doing, especially if you look at their early stuff, it still works just fine.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, there is a kind of almost now a tactical reality to what they do. Things seem like you could almost touch them. The way that hair kind of moves on people now in the breeze and stuff like that, and CGI. I mean, a lot of that stuff helps, but I don't know. Maybe they'll just plug right into our brain, and our brain, the part that accepts it without question. So they can have the crappiest. They could be like stick people walking around. And to us, we believe it's super realistic. Save them a lot of money. They wouldn't have to worry about special. They could do a flip book. They could have somebody film somebody with a flip book with the little images that move, and we'd all think it was the greatest reality because we're just told that it is, and we believe it.
On that note, check out our episode on The Matrix in 2 weeks. All right. So I couldn't resist. I look at special effects and graphics, and I kind of also wonder if it goes back to what you were saying about how we want answers because it solves horror and it makes us safe again. And I wonder if we look at like Iron Man flying or whatever else, and there's that part of our brain that reminds us, hey, that's not real. You don't have to be scared of it. And if that's part of it, we'll never get away from it.
Right. anytime the bad remake of The Haunting that had Liam Neeson in it, The Haunting of Hill House, all the CGI and all the ghosts that are so clear and everything, there's just no way that ghosts in HD, no good, no good. It's why I prefer, in a lot of ways, movies from the cheap movies, the low budget movies from the 70s, because they almost have a documentary feel to them that just gives them a kind of rawness that is a lot more effective in many ways than having something that's been like remastered and is super sharp. And as much as I admire it, it's still such a slick production that it just doesn't hit me the same way. It doesn't feel like a dream, like a nightmare. It feels too much like a presentation, like a play, like you're just right there.
Don, what do you think about the end of this? He rips himself open. The tunnel is there. What do you feel when you rewatch this?
As far as from what standpoint?
Just overall, like this was the scene I look forward to, right? Like this is like you could literally start the movie here and I would be happy, but I need the rest because, it's a film and that's how it works. But like, what do you feel when you come back to this? Like, did it still impact you the same? Or
for me, to echo the same thing, it holds up because I do the same thing with older films and CGI. I look for the really crappy stuff, the really easy to pick apart stuff. If it's the Matrix 2, I'm looking for when, Keanu is flying and I'm like, oh God, this looks so horrible. Or the fight scenes where he's fighting, a million agents. It just looks horrible. Or the first Harry Potter film where Harry's jumped on top of the wood troll or whatever it was. And this I still can't pick apart. And I said earlier that this holds up in so many ways. But I love that whole touch of it's not just me telling you to go away and go take my manuscript. It's kind of like you don't have a choice because I'm going to go ahead and ascend to the next level. But yeah, just using the book and I started trying to look at some of the words that were in at least in that text that was there. But I just found it very impressive. I found it as a really cool exit. For a character, but for me, I'm looking at it thinking, what the hell would I think if I actually saw this happen to me in person? Meanwhile, Trent is looking at it, he's still in that mindset of like, yeah, whatever, nice trick.
Well, and part of the power of this for me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Oh no, good. No.
But it's that this feels like a finale would normally feel.
Okay.
Like this feels like the final moments of a film, right? The big bad guy just ripped himself open and you have your escape. Like that's normally what we're looking for. We're looking for the escape back out. And it's twisted here to the escape is the problem. And yet you can't not go because it's already been written and you've already done it. Like I love how it feels like it should be the end and there's still 15, 20 minutes left at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But again, is it not the end because the timeline is kind of screwed up now?
The important thing is the biker is back.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, these days the biker would have like his own movie. It would be like whatever they call those, the side sequel or whatever.
Yep.
Like have like movies for the nun from the Conjuring or whatever. We have the biker and biker Funko Pop figures and all kinds of stuff.
Can you imagine it just be an hour and a half of the biker driving through staring at us?
No, it'd be like an hour and a half of some boring backstory, and then at the end, he gets on a bike and drives away into darkness or something. It'd be terrible.
But you would still hear those baseball cards in the smoke. So
right,
you've at least got that.
Right. I really like the image when he tears himself and reveals all those words. I think that it. In a way, you can't defeat the bad guy anymore because, like you said earlier, he's ascended at this point. You can't touch him if you ever could. Mm-hmm. But you certainly can't do it now. And, the reality is blended with these words, which are crafted and which say what they say and can't be altered. I think it works great. And plus, I don't know if they intended it or not, but, a lot of depending on the version of the Bible, it starts off with, in the beginning was the Word. So there's the word at the beginning of the new world. Mm-hmm. So I think it works great.
Doesn't he even say something about like these are my revelations or something, or the Book of Revelations kind of reference there? Or I took that. It's hard to say, but no, I think it's interesting how Sutter Kane is such a powerful character in horror. And if you really broke it down and just watched his scenes, he doesn't do that much stuff.
Right.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the threat that's out there that we don't see. Like Don brought up aliens. Aliens wouldn't be nearly as great if we saw the xenomorphs fully right away. I feel like he's kind of that same kind of monster where we keep hearing about him. We keep hearing how powerful he is. We keep seeing the effects of what he does, but we don't really get to see him. And even when we finally get to see him, we spend so little time with him that he's still just this enigma and this myth of Sutter Kane, really, even though we spent 3 full minutes with him?
Right.
But I think what he says and what he does, or even what he doesn't do, but his words carry so much more weight because of that limited time. I mean, he says,
Yep.
Religion seeks discipline through fear. And I sat there and was like, yep, that's exactly how it works. But, he's basically saying, like, I need people to be fearful, to fulfill my destiny or fulfill this prophecy, right? But then the other thing that he points out is more people believe in my work than the Bible. And talking about how many units he sold and how many languages it's been printed in. So, he is, as he says in the film, he's like, I'm God now. If he had a different presence, you would take this as, oh, this is some guy who's mentally disturbed or,
just an egomaniac.
Yeah. And, like Alec Baldwin's character in, oh God, now I forgot the name. But where he plays a doctor and he gets charged with malpractice, it says, I am God because I have all this stuff with my history and my degrees and within medicine. I am God. Whereas this guy is saying, I have that power. So you're not sure if he's talking about it literally or figuratively, but you realize he means it when you see his exit. And Trent, for all intents and purposes, maybe it's the shock of it. Maybe it's still that disbelief of what's going on. But that would be enough for some people to possibly make them see like, holy shit, this is like the water into wine, or this is like walking on water, or this is like, bringing back the dead. Like, this is something I can't explain, but I still need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, and that's still an act of sanity to get the hell out of there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's he is still not broken as a character, not all the way. It's like he's like a nesting doll. He's got so many damn layers you have to get through until he's in the theater at the end and he's broken. Before
the theater, there's the dream where Trent's on the bus and Sutter Kane hits my favorite color is blue. And we get the blue scene.
Yes.
And I don't know. I can't tell you what it is that I adore about this. Like, I can't put it into words because I feel like this scene doesn't actually fit in the film. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Like, it's the one scene that feels out of place to me. And it's almost like Kane got egotistical and was like, I'm going to show you that I control the world around you. And it's solely for his benefit, right? But like, as a person watching it, I feel like it doesn't fit in the film for the audience as much as it fits for him. Does that make sense? Am I way off on this?
I got to disagree because as an audience member,
because I want better info on this. And
there's still that part of you that's watching and it's like, well, how much of this is bullshit and how much of this is reality? And because you've seen how Trent responds to things, right? So he thinks everybody in town is acting. He goes to the motel and the manuscript is waiting there for him, and then he burns the manuscript. So you're seeing how he's reacting to all this other stuff. So as an audience member, you're torn between, is this real, or is this, as Trent is arguing, or at least trying to argue to himself at this point, is this kind of just one of these things where he's part of somebody's game? But I think as an audience member, for that moment where you see inside of Trent's head where he's having that dream, and and he says that makes that statement of my favorite color was blue, and the entire bus is lit up with the color blue, you start to realize like, oh shit, maybe maybe this is something else going on here. Maybe this isn't, a con. Because in all honesty, I mean, the lady on the bus, that was one of those few moments of, I guess, relatable reality where you think that if he were on this bus, somebody else would have been talking to him or said something to the effect of, you must carry out the word or you must spread the word, some type of comment towards him that relates back to what Sutter Kane had told him to do. But it's kind of this, mundane conversation that this woman is having on the bus with him, like so many of us have been involved in public transportation or just out in public. And he's asleep, wakes up, bus is blue.
Yeah, and it's like it shows us that our hero, he doesn't have agency, even though,
right.
We're moving toward the climax where we expect the hero to do something. And those other things like burning the manuscript doesn't help and all that.
Right.
But he can still try to find another way to destroy it or whatever. It also maybe, I hadn't thought of it till now, but it's almost like he's the one carrying the reality warp contagion with him into the world. Bad things were happening in that people were going crazy, but that's the only bad thing that happened before Trent left the town that we know of. And we don't see what goes on out there because in the beginning of the movie, it just says things are pretty bad out there. It could just be violence, but it could be, reality warps, which makes it odd that people would be still doing their jobs in the asylum, but whatever. But it really could be him carrying it with him. He is the carrier of the word, right?
Well, and the orderlies or whatever at the beginning, one of them says something like to the effect of like, do you think he's one of them?
Oh, yeah. One of the crazy people, yeah. Even if people are just going nuts and killing each other like the agent, it's got to be super bad because Trent doesn't want out of the asylum. I mean, he wants to stay where he's safe. So it really must be pretty bad out there.
When I look at it, I was thinking like it followed him there.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much that it's going on either way and he's just trying to escape it, but he does say it's safe here.
And, maybe it's just if he does think he's like a carrier, he's like walled off from everybody. Although he's struggling when he goes in, so unless he's pretending to struggle so that they will put him in. But he sure looks like he's really struggling at the beginning.
He does. And that kind of went back to the way things shift in this for me. Like, it makes me wonder how much time really passed before somebody came to talk to him and he was drawing, or things like that. I don't know. But
yeah, and I just thought of this now when I think it's just a silhouette of Sutter Kane or whatever shows up and he says this is a rotten way to end it. Even though he's like supposed to be like broken down all the way, I mean, he's not yet. He's, he's still very consciously trying to pull his own scam, actually. I hadn't thought of that. It's his own scam he's trying to pull at the beginning when he's been like the finder out of scams, the revealer of scams, where he's trying to pretend to be insane. But, he's still like mocking, Sutter Kane. He's still like defiant and critiquing him on, how he's creating his story. So he's still not broken all the way. It's not until that movie theater scene that he finally is broken all the way.
Maybe he's just, maybe it's one of those things where when life gets really bad and there's too much going on, I just start giggling about it and nothing phases me anymore. Maybe it's like that. Maybe. But
hey, but at least he got popcorn. There's still popcorn in the world after, so.
I think it would have actually been kind of fun to like see him like getting it while like chaos is going on around him. Like he just walks back there and grabs some, but
I'm just bothered that there was popcorn and no drink. I mean, I would have loved to have seen like him cradling the bucket in one arm and then have the soda in the other and just kind of doing that old scoot we would do with the standard movie theater seats. We just kind of scoot over to find your spot and then get comfortable. But yeah, the laugh that he has, I can relate to, as James just mentioned, like those moments in your life that you're either overwhelmed with stuff or you just kind of you have a series of bad things that happen, and you just kind of like you just have no choice. You either cry or you laugh, and sometimes you laugh and cry at the same time. But I've been in those moments where you're just sitting there like, God, what else can go wrong? And you just start laughing, and there have been those times that somebody actually would probably think that something's wrong with you because you're like just laughing at nothing, and really what it is it's just your defense mechanism to deal with all this stress and trauma.
What's that like?
Just thinking right now, I wonder if in a way it's like a twisted kind of positive ending, because if Trent accepts this, that means he's found something to believe in after all this time throughout the whole movie. And I mean, it's horrible, but there's also that weird positive aspect to it. I love to do that in my books. I try to give like my twisted version of a happy ending to each one of them that nobody would probably think is happy, but it's not just somebody dies or, somebody survives or somebody triumphs over whatever it is. So it could be positive. I hadn't thought of that really. I thought of him just being broken. I have thought before that he's like, for somebody who does not believe that there's anything beyond our world, he is learning that there is, which is, the big thing for religion and philosophy and all that to transcend, to become to have enlightenment or whatever. So he does kind of endarkenment, I guess. Is there any real difference at the end, when you get to that point?
You just totally like mind fucked me, and now I have to go back and watch it and rethink this whole thing.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do that too, because that part hadn't occurred to me. It wasn't until we were talking about the release of stress, and I'm like, wait a minute, does that mean he won in a way? He's still laughing at this stuff. He's sitting there. He's got his popcorn. Somebody's also like washed off all the crayon, I think. I don't think he has crayon anymore. So even though he's got his hospital smock on or whatever.
And he's got the joy of having the theater to himself, which is a dream come true. So
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, maybe it's positive in a sense. I don't know. I hadn't thought of that. What did you think about the creepy kids chasing the dog? That's kind of like that the biker image.
Yeah,
they're just there, in the they run slow motion a little bit, kind of like the biker sort of ride slow. But
no, I mean, that goes back to that whole unsettling thing that still holds up. Those kids are creepy.
Yeah,
and so well done. I spent a lot of time in small town Nebraska, and that just happens. There'll be like a group of kids running, and you just get like this weird feeling about it, even though there's nothing weird about it. They're just kids out playing, and then stuff like this really feeds into that, because then I'm like, are they,
Yeah, and the scene where we find out what they did to the dog works so good because, your eye is not immediately drawn to the fact the dog only has 3 legs now. Mm-hmm. And so it's not till it starts to move. And it's like, we're starting to notice these details like the painting, things like that that are coming up to us. And we see the kids kind of look like they have the distorted faces, sort of, in that second scene. So I think those kind of moments where we experience the shifting of reality, just ourselves too, not through Trent's eyes or anybody else's really, we're noticing it too. So I think that does a really good job of sort of starting to upend our own reality, what we expect.
I agree. All right. So at this point of the show, we normally do you have films that you would suggest people watch if they enjoyed this? And I'm going to let you go first because you're the guest.
Well, Yellow Brick Road, maybe. It even has a kind of a different but similar image that ends it. I think it's on Prime, maybe, but I love that movie. It's so bizarre and surreal. It's great. The Endless and whatever the movie was before Endless, I can't think. Resolution, I think. Resolution especially, but The Endless too. Both of those have a wonderful kind of what's reality, and Resolution has that narrative metafictional thing going on too in it that you don't see in The Endless. So maybe those two. Or
Nice.
3, I guess.
Yeah. I only really have one that I want to push, and I guess 2. So Color Out of Space, just because it still has the Lovecraftian thing going on, and also because we just covered it on the show. So you should do that and then check out our episode. But no, my my other one that I would go to is Event Horizon.
Damn.
And it's about the end. It's about the buildup and just the isolation of a weird place and everything changing around you. And I don't want to give too much away if people haven't seen it, but if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. And yeah,
Definitely.
Somebody should do like a fan video where Sam Neill's character from Event Horizon comes in and sits down next to in the theater next to his character from In the Mouth of Madness. That would be awesome.
Well, and like the scene where he turns and his face is all distorted or messed up. I mean, it's blue, so you could fit it in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, turning in the theater would be amazing. That'd be a great mashup. All right, Don, give us your top 900 movies.
See, I figured that you would take one of these, so you got Event Horizon. Jacob's Ladder would be one as far as dealing with reality, or at least what you think reality is. Village of the Damned and Children of the Corn because of the creepy kids, and also the religious, indoctrination or cult-like behavior. Fallen was, if you haven't seen it, I mean, those who are listening, it's with Denzel Washington. It's about this demon that jumps into other people. But I
always forget about that film.
Oh, I'm never going to let you forget about it. We're gonna do that one day. I hope. End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where the devil literally comes in and tries to take over the world because it's Y2K. Let's see. I had, as far as comedies, Delirious with John Candy.
Yes,
where he is a soap opera writer and he is basically rewriting the world around him to better suit himself in a lot of cases. And Bedazzled, either one, the original or the remake, because it has to deal with this whole idea of reshaping the reality that's around you with the assistance of the devil.
I want to add one more.
And that's it. I cut a couple. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Frailty.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say too much about Frailty because if you don't know, I don't want you to know. But check out the trailer and then check out the film if it appeals to you. And I adore Frailty. I adore the entire story of Frailty. So definitely throwing that in there.
Yeah, I got one to throw in too. The Lathe of Heaven, based on Ursula K. Le Guin's story. I think they've made a couple versions of it, but it's about a guy who his dreams can change reality, and he doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks he's crazy, and he goes to a psychiatrist who figures out what's going on and gives him post-hypnotic suggestions to try to shape reality in his dreams. And it's really interesting to watch as different things occur and as the reality shifts. And the reality at the end of the movie is so different than it was at the beginning. So I don't know where that is to be found, but go look up The Lathe of Heaven and check it out.
Nice. I haven't seen that, but that sounds fascinating. So let's bring it back to you, Tim. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you online, order your books, any new stuff you have to push that you want to tell them about?
Well, you can find me at timwagner.com. That's my website. I'm just at Tim Wagner on Twitter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. You can go to my Amazon page if you want to buy my books. Got a lot of, I got some short stories and articles for free on my website. I have a blog called Writing in the Dark. You can find a link from my website too, where I have a whole bunch of articles, some that, showed up in different forms in Writing in the Dark, but a lot which didn't. I've got a book coming out next month called Your Turn to Suffer, which it has its own kind of it's reality warping to it. That's one of the things I do a lot. So if you like reality warp stuff, there's that. I have a book probably coming out in October. It's a novelization of a movie. It would have come out last October, but COVID caused this movie to get bumped to the 2021. I can't say what the movie is because I have not been given the go ahead, except I'm dying to talk about the experience of writing it. So maybe I can go back on your show and talk about it.
Please
about the movie
do.
and then
Definitely.
talking about
Absolutely.
the writing of it. Because then once I've seen it, I'll know because I've written 4 novelizations and 3 of them I've seen the movie afterwards. And one of them I saw the movie ahead of time, which is pretty rare. But I can talk about what's in the script and what's not and what I did. And so I'll be curious to see what they leave in and what they take out of the script.
Very cool.
And I just it was just announced that I'm going to do a companion book to Writing in the Dark. It's going to be a book of exercises, since so many people seem to enjoy those from the first book.
Oh, that's great. I think anything that helps people increase output in this genre is fantastic. So,
most definitely.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show today, man.
Yes,
thanks for having me. I had a great time.
You'll have to have you come back again.
Well, yeah, definitely. That's a locked-in thing. Like, you have to do it now. It's been written, so now it must be done, right?
Yes.
So, all right, we'll wrap it up there. So, until next time, as always, I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And we will see you here at thenecronama.com.